The MacBook Pro 16 inches used as an example. Based on the above criteria, this machine obtains a repairability index of 7 out of 10. Okay, I'm about to lose my mind. Hey everybody, how's it going? So, in a recent video, I discussed new proposed EU legislation that they voted seemingly in favor of, moving a little bit more in a less throwaway culture direction, more repairable direction. And I gave you my thoughts on that. And here's a follow-up. This is with regards to labeling in France, where companies may have to label their products so the customer knows some idea of how repairable it is. I am going to read this and give you my thoughts in real time. I haven't read this article yet. Someone linked me to it, and I thought it would be kind of interesting. I don't know whether to be excited or sad yet because I haven't really seen the implementation. I have a lot of questions on it, so I will read it and link it down below for all of you to see if you're interested. It says Apple is preparing to display the repairability index of its products in France. So the idea here is there's going to be some sort of repairability index so that you, the end consumer, can have some idea of how repairable the products are. Now, I have many questions here. It says, as of January 1st, 2021 in France, Apple will display the repairability index of its products on the Apple Store and in its stores. Information that has become compulsory under the law on the fight against waste and the circular economy. Manufacturers of electronic and electrical equipment will now have to inform their customers about the repairability index of their products. 5 categories of hardware will serve as pilots: washing machines, televisions, smartphones, laptops, and lawnmowers, before others join this list later. This is only one of the sections of this fairly broad law: disposable plastics, unsold textiles or food, etc. On the model of energy labels, which inform consumers about the energy performance of a good, this repairability index will use colored signage ranging from red to green with a score out of 10. The development of this index was carried out in consultation between manufacturers, sellers, distributors, NGOs, as well as consumer associations and the Ecological Transition Agency. A repairability index will allow consumers to know if their product is repairable, difficult to repair, or not repairable. It will have the means to act via a simple and visual tool, sums up the Ministry of Ecological Transition, which adds, in order to facilitate repair and promote the use of spare parts from the circular economy, consumers will benefit when purchasing a product, information on the availability and unavailability, novelty of spare parts. The period for making spare parts available must be 15 working days. So let's just go over a couple of the first questions I have before we even finish the article, just my first impressions. The first question that I would obviously have is who's dealing with the subjective nature of these questions. So, for instance, if we're talking about the energy efficiency of a product, let's say that you sell a desktop computer. I can plug that into the wall. I can then, I can cut the wire open. I have my multimeter there in current mode. I can say, here's how much energy this machine takes at idle. Here's how much it takes when I run Prime 95 and GPU test, and really all I'm giving you there is a number. This is objective information, so I can give you an idea as to how energy efficient a product is. If I buy a refrigerator and I have 2 different refrigerators, and I could say, okay, when it has these groceries inside of it, how long does it take to get to this temperature, and how much energy does it use? This is really objective stuff. It's not like an area where Erica or I can disagree because we're talking about numbers on a multimeter. Whereas when it comes to repairability, there's a lot that can be debated there when it comes to how repairable something is. Some people find certain items easier to repair than other items. For instance, for me, I actually found the iPhone 4 to be easier to replace the screen on than the iPhone 3. The iPhone 3 most people thought was easier because all you had to do is, you just take this out. The screen pops right out. Once you got the screen out, you just, unglue the digitizer, glue a new one on, and put it in the phone. The iPhone 4, you have to take the entire motherboard out of the phone, the speaker out of the phone, the vibrator, all the stuff has to come out of the phone to get to the screen, and then all of it has to go back in. However, even though that's the case, I would find the iPhone 4 easier to repair because the screen was usually sold as one piece. On the iPhone 3, the digitizer was sold separately from the frame, and usually when you were actually able to buy the digitizer installed into a frame already, it was usually a complete pile of shit. It would be so horrible that you'd be better off just gluing your own digitizer in there and getting that done without dust. Again, you can totally do it. It's just I personally would rather actually take the board out of the phone and all that stuff with the iPhone 4 and not have to deal with screen adhesion than have to deal with screen adhesion but not have to take the board out of the phone. So when you have different groups of people that may disagree as to what is repairable, how do you deal with that? But more importantly, who is deciding whether or not it is repairable and on what criteria. Because if this is a case where Apple is allowed to set the repairability score on their own based on how simple they think it is to do certain jobs, that's going to be different than, let's say, if I were to set it, or if you were to set it. It's easy for me to say something is easy once I've done it a million times. Would you find it easy as a consumer? Who's making these ratings and what are they being based on is really important to me. Further, when they say availability of parts, what constitutes parts that are being discussed here? Are we talking about the availability of a screen and a battery? Are we talking about the availability of a charge port? Are we talking about the availability of a power button? Are we talking about the availability of specific components on the motherboard or a replacement motherboard? So, for instance, if you make available to the device a replacement motherboard and a screen, however, you tell the companies that make the chipsets that go in the motherboard, don't sell those chips to anybody but us, is that now considered repairable? If you have a device that costs $2,000 and the motherboard to that device sells for $1,700 and you tell all the manufacturers of the chips that go on that motherboard, don't sell anybody that $5 or $10 chip that goes in this board that often fails, but you sell the motherboard, is that technically going to count as making the part available? These are important questions. Now, when it comes to Apple's own independent repair program, a program that I very stupidly last August said, let's give Apple a chance, this is a great thing, and then we found out in December that it was a cold pile of shit for reasons that are summed up in a video that you see below. But those who always say, assume the worst of Apple, I assume the best of Apple. I thanked them. And I look like a fucking moron for it. But anyway, when it comes to the Apple IRP program, you are able to buy a screen to an iPhone 6 or a battery to an iPhone 6. However, you cannot buy a charge port. You cannot buy a headphone jack. You cannot buy certain, let's say, like a earpiece or microphone or a speaker or any of those things through that program. You're not going to get access to many of the parts that I want. You can't buy a power button, and God forbid you actually want parts to MacBooks or everything else. A lot of that stuff is not available. So if you make a screen and a battery available, does that really matter if the buttons and the charge ports are not actually available when these are parts that you can buy on the third-party market fairly easily? Now, let's just continue going through the article. It says this information becomes mandatory from Apple January 1st. Apple has started to prepare its teams in the Apple Store so that they are able to provide explanations to customers. According to the documents we have been able to consult, the version of the Apple label, a white logo on a green background inspired by this one above, with the wholesale index and 5 color levels, will be used as envisaged. The law first for iPhones and portable Macs. Then the label will be visible later on the rest of the products. Pursuant to Article 54192 of this law, the index will appear on the Apple Store as well as in stores. There is also a support page to bring together more detailed information and tables on how the ratings for the different products were calculated. 5 criteria are used to establish the repairability index. 1. The availability of documentation for repair, use, and maintenance, as well as during the period which this information is made available. Disassembly, spare parts, the price of spare parts compared to new, and the software updates available, and the offer of remote technical assistance. So when they say the availability of documentation, do you mean the document that says, here is how you open the bottom of your MacBook, here is how you put the cover back on your MacBook, or do you mean the actual board schematic that allows me to do my job? Because you could make available a manual like the manual made available to an Apple authorized service provider. However, that manual is useless to me. It only tells me information that anybody with common sense already knows. That manual does not tell me anything that I need to know to be able to fix the product properly. Everything in that manual is stuff that should be common sense to anybody who has ever played with Legos or Kinects as a kid and wants to put something together and take it apart again. Which manual are we talking about being made available? Ones that matter or the ones that don't? And if you make available some useless manual that doesn't matter, do you then get a point for repairability for making documentation available while simultaneously hiding the schematics and the board views that are actually part and parcel to electronics repair and have been customary to include for people who service the product for like 70 years all the way up until it wasn't? Disassembly. How easily this is done, how easy it is to access parts, what tools are required, and how the parts are secured in the device. This one seems fairly straightforward, but again, what parts are we talking about disassembling? What parts are serviceable and what are not? So for instance, on many laptops, you will have a screen, even on really thin laptops that have high-end screens, you'll have screens that can be unscrewed and screwed back in very easily. What Apple has done with the Air ever since 2010, with the Retina ever since 2012, is have a screen that is held in with adhesive, no screws, adhesive to the back cover. Now, technically, you can replace the entire display assembly, including the shell, and the hinges, and the Wi-Fi antenna, and the back cover, and the webcam. But you're going to wind up spending, and depending on the time and the model, somewhere between $250 to $650 for the part by itself, when it was customary that an LCD screen, even a high-end one, would go for somewhere in the range of $35 to $95. Now, if you make it available, technically you can disassemble the machine and you can disassemble the screen by unscrewing the screen assembly from the machine. However, the screen assembly, a $650 part, is not necessarily something that I would consider fully disassembled, as you would, let's say, a laptop like a ThinkPad, where you literally just, you take out a couple of screws and the screen, the $35 to $90 part, just comes right out. Who is determining whether or not the disassembly is simple or hard, and what areas of the machine are we expected to be able to disassemble? Is it okay to simply just be able to unscrew the screen assembly that costs more than half the value of the laptop? Or are we talking about the ability to actually remove an LCD screen? This may seem pedantic here, but these are questions that need to be asked, because if you have even a $2,000 Lenovo laptop, you may be able to replace the screen in it for, even if you buy one of the really high-end color-calibrated screens and all that, you may be able to buy a screen for it for $93, whereas with the Apple machine, you may be looking at $650 or so, or $600, simply for the part. Now, to be clear, I fully understand that when it comes to the screen quality, Apple does provide you with a considerably higher quality screen than most other PC vendors. I can hear people here saying right now you shouldn't compare price because of quality concerns. However, even if we are talking about something with a basic-ass 1366 by whatever TN screen like the 13-inch MacBook Air, even something like that from 2010 that uses a basic, crappily calibrated TN screen, that screen assembly is very expensive in contrast to the LCD cell by itself, because you're buying all this extra stuff that you don't actually need, like the metal, the webcam, the Wi-Fi antenna, the hinges, the body, and so on and so forth. Next up here, it says spare parts and the price of spare parts compared to new. And this gives me some hope that if they were to say, look, we do offer the whole logic board that's $1,700 on a $2,000 computer, that necessarily wouldn't fly, and that there would be some further inquiry where they go, okay, can you at least tell the chip manufacturers to not avoid selling the chips to Mouser or DigiKey or people like me if I want to buy a couple of thousand of them? That may force a step in the right direction, but we'll see. Continues. In its explanations, Apple produces a table as should be seen by customers next month. The MacBook Pro 16 inches used as an example. Based on the above criteria, this machine obtains a reparability index of 7 out of 10. Okay. I'm about to lose my mind. That machine has been out for an entire fucking year. I can't buy a charge chip to it. I can't buy the chip that dies all the time for no good reason, that is there to tell the USB-C charger, output 20 volts of the computer. That little chip that communicates with the charger and says, hey, I know you want to put out 5 volts because you think this is a phone or a mouse or something. I'm a MacBook. I want 20 volts, not 5 volts. Charge me. That chip that Texas Instruments makes, that chip that should be made available for like $5 to $15, maybe 20 or 30 if we really want to add a bunch of markup on there. I can't buy that. I'm not allowed to buy that. Texas Instruments will not sell that to me. Any of their distributors will not sell that to me. On a machine that I can't fix, if it has a basic no charging issue, it gets a 7 out of 10 on this piece of shit repairability index. Oh my, I'm not making this up. It's right here. So this is a problem. I have a feeling Apple produces a table as should be seen by customers. This is used as an example. Is there a third party that's writing this, or is Apple writing their own? Because this would kind of be like if we go to some eligible bachelor site and we have, height, physical appearance, accomplishments in life, how charming he is, how large the bags are under his eyes, and all this other stuff. And I rate myself on the scale like a 9.9 out of 10. Because it's not the women rating me, it's me rating myself. You see how that would be kind of like a rigged system? Because I have a feeling that that's what's going on here. It says, in detail, he obtains a 12.3 out of 20 for the documentation part. I'm not able to get a single schematic for that piece of shit. 6.8 out of 20 in terms of its dismantling and access to components. The one thing that I actually can do in that computer is open it to get to the parts that I'm not able to replace. So check this out. They say that there's a 12 out of 20 for documentation. I can't buy documentation. There's a 6 out of 20 for the dismantling and access to components. I'm able to dismantle and get access to the components literally instantly. Anybody with half a brain can open that computer. A 14 out of 20 for obtaining spare parts. I can't buy any of the shit I need for that computer. 16 out of 20 for the price of those parts. How is it a 16 out of 20 when I can't even get access to them? And 20 out of 20 for updates and remote support. Okay, the 20 out of 20 for updates and remote support, that's fair. Because if you have a problem with that MacBook, you can call 1-800, go Apple, and they'll tell you to go fuck yourself and buy a new one. They will support the product. Apple will support the product if you go to a store. It'll run the latest operating system. It'll likely run the latest operating system for at least the next 8 to 10 years if older Apple products are any indication. So I'll give them the last one as fair. But 12 out of 20 in the documentation, fuck you. 6.8 out of 20 for access to the internal component. This makes no sense. They're saying the part that any moron can easily do, which is opening the computer and getting access to its basic components, is why it's rated poorly, yet they give you a great score on access to spare parts, which is literally the reason that recently I had to email a customer and tell them that I couldn't repair their computer and get back a very angry email. I've had customers that have gotten very mad at me for the fact that I can't fix this machine, and on my website, there's not even a price list for the 16-inch MacBook Pro repair because I don't have any of the parts I need to actually be able to offer it. And they're rating it a 14.7 out of 20 for getting spare parts. That's crazy. This system is bullshit. Like, just absolute bullshit. It's based on bullshit. People who are actually in the repair industry or know anything about repairing these products have nothing to do with making these repairability scores. They are going to mean nothing to the customer when they have an actual problem with this machine, and they will give the customer the idea that the product is more fixable or less fixable than it is. Less fixable in terms of they can't get inside of it, which is not true because you can get inside of it with a $3 Weha screwdriver or a $5 Weha screwdriver. I actually bought some of mine used because I'm a cheapskate. And it's going to give you the idea that spare parts are available when they are not. Show me the parts. Show me these chips. Show me where they're all being made available. I'd love to know. The law provides that this repairability index is used to establish the durability index of a product, a new rating that will be offered to clients from January 2024 in addition to or replacing the first index. Thus, the average consumer unfamiliar with a manufacturer's after-sales service and product life cycle policies will be able to estimate overall lifespan and technical monitoring conditions for its acquisition. Bullshit. Now, again, you may be saying, Lewis, customers don't care about repairability as much as you do, so this is not really that important. And if that's the case, why come up with this legislation at all? Why come up with legislation? Why go through all the effort to do this if you're then going to let the company itself choose how they rank on their own system? I mean, or again, maybe it's not Apple coming up with this. If you have someone within the government in France coming up with these ratings, who is it so that we can replace them with someone that actually knows what they're doing? This is horrible. There's really just no way else for me to put it. And it says, yeah, another super useful thing, ... I can't tell if that's French for sarcasm. Repairable or not, if you want Apple, you buy Apple. So good, yes, in itself, not very useful, I find. I agree, not very useful. This is hysterical. Someone says, 14.7 out of 20 for obtaining spare parts. I expected zeros everywhere. Clearly someone who has actually tried to fix one of these 16-inch MacBook Pros in the past. 16.20 for the price of the parts. I did not expect it. Again, show me a website that would show me where Mouser or DigiKey or Newark or Texas Instruments or Apple is allowing me to buy a CD3217. What is the price? How are you basing any of this information? So what are my thoughts on this? In my opinion, at the very least, the way this is currently being implemented, it's completely useless. And I would love to know who is responsible for creating these repairability ratings. I'd love to be able to open a dialogue with them or speak back and forth. I don't really know how much politicians in France that are subject to the whims and desires of French voters care much about some arrogant New Yorker telling them, how things should be, but I'd be more than happy to consult with anybody on this stuff free of charge to explain what my concerns would be, because I believe that the concerns that I'm expressing here are the same concerns that French customers are going to have. A French customer plugging in their laptop where their CD3217 dies is going to be equally as screwed as a New York customer, as a California customer, as a Florida customer, as a Texas customer. It's pretty much the same thing all around. And these ratings, they genuinely make no sense. It's not even that they're inflated in one area. It's that they're low in the area where the MacBook is actually easy. The 16-inch MacBook Pro allows me to replace the trackpad without having to remove the battery. This is not true in older models. There are many parts of it that are actually easier to get to in contrast to older models of the Mac. And they gave that a low repairability score, yet they gave parts availability a very high score when they're, again, just where am I buying the parts of this computer? I don't understand where these ratings came from. I think they make no sense, and sadly, the worst appears to be true. So in the video that I did on the EU and their right to repair legislation and their thoughts, I said that I really hoped this winds up focusing on the things that matter and not the things that don't. Things that matter: availability of schematics and diagrams and availability of parts. That matters. Trying to force a manufacturer to use USB-C, again, I'm less concerned about the charge port they choose to use any sort of cloaca for all I care. What I care about is my ability to get access to those charge ports and charging chips and purchase them, so that when whatever cloaca is used on the device to charge it dies, I can fix it for the customer. And if this is the start that we're off to, this seems to be a fairly rocky start, and really does just honestly just. Yeah, this just kind of reminds me why I often lean libertarian and think that the government is useless at solving problems. Because, if they would actually say, hey, this is a little anti-competitive, you're colluding with every single one of these chip companies and telling them don't sell to any of the competitors of your repair services, that could be where you come in from an antitrust point of view and where the government may actually be useful. But requiring repairability labels on the products where the repairability scores are completely disconnected from the actual reality of working on the product, in my opinion, that is useless. My apologies if this video has been a little rambly. I haven't had the time that I've wanted to put into this, and it's about midnight, and I just kind of wanted to finally read this article because I've been putting it off for a few days, and I knew honestly, a part of me knew that when I read it I was going to become angry with what was in it, so there was this really great anticipation to finally reading it so that I could just get it off my plate. And now I have. Now I realize that the French government, when it comes to right to repair, seems to be honestly as useless as the United States government when it comes to right to repair. So there's something we have in common, French citizens. Anyway, tell me if I'm being too cynical here. Let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today, and as always, I hope you learned something.